And welcome to another episode of Civil Discourse Now. My name is Mark Small. I'm co-host with Paul Ogden.
Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, Paul. We are coming to you from Big Hat Books in Indianapolis, Indiana. We're in the Broad Ripple area of Indianapolis. Big Hat is at 6510 Cornell Avenue. It's a marvelous selection of books. One book right now that's selling here is Destiny of the Republic by Candace Millard. It's about the death of President Garfield he died in 1881. I'm going to buy this today and read it because it would be really, really good. They also have space here to rent for special occasions. In addition to that, they have a gallery on the second floor here, the Gregory Lucas Gallery, G.C. Lucas Galleries, has a bunch of stuff that they show up here, paintings and stuff that's really kind of cool. So, Paul?
Mark, the show is Civil Discourse Now, where we discuss in a civil manner local, state, national, and international politics. The idea is to bring to the public sphere a discussion of political issues where we're not talking over each other like you see on TV shows quite often. Today's issue is, I would say, probably a state issue, right to work.
Well, it's state with national implications. Indiana this year, and started last year, has before it three items of legislation characterizes right to work. And our guests to discuss this topic today are Bill Groth. Bill is a lawyer practicing here in Indiana. His areas of practice are appellate, labor and employment law, election and voting rights, and social security disability. He's admitted before the Indiana Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, the 7th, 6th, where's the 6th? Is that Ohio?
Cincinnati. Yeah,
Cincinnati. And D.C. Circuit Courts of Appeals. That's 3 of them. I've got 4. I've got the 9th. That's San Francisco and the Federal.
You win.
No, I didn't. Not in the case out in D.C. And also with us is Jeff Cox, who's been a guest of the show before. He practices, it's J.R. Cox Law, LLC.
Yeah, .com is the website.
Yes, and we are going to discuss the bills that are put before the... And if I go into any more description of Jeff, it'd be redundant on what I've said before.
Before we get into it, we don't care about Jeff. But Bill, you might want to
get that all the
time. Email address for Bill or whatever. We have a viewer has a labor law issue or some issue where Bill might provide representation if he has a contact information.
Well, thank you for giving me that opportunity. My email address is wgroth, Groth, at fdgtlaborlaw.com.
And I apologize for being rude, but it's just my nature.
I guess Jeff did give us his website, but do you have an email, Jeff?
Just go to my website, www.jrcoxlawllc.com.
What type of law do you do, Jeff?
Well, I'm mostly litigation, but I can also do wills, trusts, estates, bankruptcy. I do election law too, because I've got extensive experience in that, especially eminent domain. And I'm also a military historian.
Okay. That pay well, that last thing?
Not really, but it's a lot of fun.
Right.
And you learn a lot, which actually helps in the legal profession, I think. Keeps things in perspective.
Right.
Okay, so we're done with that to really further expose how rude I was and not giving our guests the opportunity to introduce themselves, but that's beside the point. Now, I'll get to the topic of what we're here to discuss today. We're here to discuss the so-called right-to-work laws that are before the Indiana General Assembly. There are 3 bills, as I understand, House Bills 1028 and 1043, and Senate Bill 395. They're called right-to-work laws, but
what was the House bill number again, Mark?
the number that I got was, there are 2 numbers, 1028 and 1043.
I got 1001, and that's the one that's moved out of committee.
Well, then...
Terry Torr's bill.
Okay, and maybe they've renumbered them or something to get them through, but the one thing that they have in common from what I read in the texts is that it makes it a misdemeanor to require an employee to pay any part of their pay towards a labor organization or for any kind of dues and to make that person be a member. To discuss this, Bill, do you want to give us your view on these bills and kind of an outline of what your position would be on it?
I will try to do that, Mark. Obviously, I'm not real happy about these particular pieces of legislation. Obviously, an attempt to make Indiana the, I think, 23rd so-called right-to-work state in the nation. Essentially, I'll try to put it as simply as I can. Essentially, what this particular bill would do is make it a crime for an employer to contract with a union voluntarily and include a provision called an agency shop provision by which employees who are members of the bargaining unit and represented by the union, required to be represented by the union by federal law, are required then not to join the union, but to pay the costs of representational activities such as bargaining a contract, processing grievances, and taking those grievances to arbitration. So it's essentially an abridgment of freedom of contract. But unfortunately, as part of the Taft-Hartley Act in 1947, which President Truman vetoed and was overridden, these types of provisions, these types of laws are permitted state by state.
Jeff?
Well, I disagree with right to work as well. I oppose the right to work proposed legislation. And the way he's described it actually makes it sound worse, because it's not so much preventing the unions from the status of representing their workers. It's not cutting off some of the workers from union representation, but not others. What it is, it's leaving the responsibility with the unions to protect the workers, but essentially denying them the funds to do so. And so if anything goes wrong in the workplace and a worker needs protection, the union's not going to be able to do it, and he's going to turn his anger toward the union instead of the employer. And obviously it's fact specific on the situation, but I think that sounds a bit dishonest to me.
Paul?
Well, I'm here to defend the right to work legislation. I have been, and part of it comes from personal experience. Several years ago, wasn't making any money practicing law, couldn't get a job. I decided I would do other things, look into other things. Self-employed for a while, and I worked as a substitute teacher for a while. I still wasn't making enough money, so I had the bright idea. I grew up in a farming environment. I'm not averse to hard work. I had the idea of going to UPS, working a few hours, maybe 5 days a week, like 4 hours, loading trucks with big packages and big boxes. When I signed up for that job, I was told that it's a union shop and I would eventually join the Teamsters within like a month. The Teamsters were the entity that represented them. I found out that in the 20 years leading up to that point, the workers, the people unloading the boxes on the trucks had a whole 50-cent raise. They'd gone from $8 to $8.50 in like 20 years. We had a 10-minute break in a 4 or 5 hour period to go get a soft drink or whatever. And by the time you walk to the other side of the building to get the soft drink, your break was over. I'm not sure what the Teamsters were doing. I'm not sure what the union was doing to protect these workers. They weren't doing a good job, in my opinion. I would have liked to have been able to opt out of representing the Teamsters, because once I hit that 1 month period, which I never did because I ended up deciding I couldn't do it. Substitute teaching in the morning and loading trucks at 2 in the morning just doesn't work. But anyway, the fact is, once that kicked in, they would have been taking a lot of my $8.50 an hour. So I'm not sure I think the problem is, and I think why the right to work has support, is unions have fallen down on the job. They haven't always stood up and represented employees very well.
Well, my father was a union sheet metal contractor, and I blogged on this on right to work, especially this week, Some of the people who are in the sheet metal workers union with whom I work, a couple of them were real bums. Some of them were some of the finest craftsmen I've ever worked with. Most of the people were really good workers and really good workmen that were, in other words, the union spanned pretty much what people are. If you had a problem with the Teamsters union, you should have talked to your steward or voiced that to the union. But what I'm seeing here is Indiana, for 10 years, nobody else has considered a right-to-work law. Oklahoma was the last state to enact it. Nobody has since 2001. The studies generally show that right-to-work states, well, you look at the incentive that's supposed to be there. And Governor Mitch Daniels is promoting this as a means by which businesses can be attracted to Indiana, because presumably they don't have to pay as high a wage by coming here to Indiana. None of the studies show that that's being the effect of right-to-work laws for those other states. One study that came out of the economic, that's ECI.
Economic Policy Institute.
EPI. It was very, very well done in terms of methodology. Indicated there'd be a 3.2%, there's a 3.2% loss in pay for people. There's a 4.2% loss in bennies and a 5.6% loss in pensions. In other words, like 15% package in terms of compensation for employees. This is simply a means by which, once the legislation goes in, employees lose the means by which they can bargain effectively.
Well, Mark, that contradicts the Ball State study. 7 of 10 states, the salaries actually went up.
But the Ball State study that came out like in the last couple of weeks, the Ball State study is not nearly as comprehensive. Have you read the Ball State study?
Yeah, I read it.
So did I. You read it after I called you. The Ball State study, though, only focuses on manufacturing. It only focuses on that one narrow area. It doesn't look at any other areas of the economy, and it doesn't factor in a lot of the variables that the EPI study does. Cost of living, different regions, stuff like that. At best, you would say that the Ball State study shows that there's kind of a wash. The EPI study, and
Well, Mark, it's Ball State, it's where I went to school, so you know it's a good institution. It's not DePaul, it's obviously a quality institution. It's the Harvard of the Midwest.
I'm staying out of this one. I'm staying out of this one.
I wasn't going to criticize your school, one of the main alumni of which is known for making pizzas. But that's beside the point. The Ball State study wasn't as comprehensive in terms of looking at the variables. There was a study out of Notre Dame from the Higgins Labor Institute that looked at the EPI study and looked at the Chamber of Commerce study that was commissioned here in Indiana, and said that the EPI study was much more comprehensive and covered the factors pretty well, and that there is a net loss. It doesn't make sense if what they're saying is the reason we want to put it in is to lower wages to attract those businesses, and it doesn't have that effect.
Tell me, Paul, how weakening unions, further weakening unions, are already, the union density is way off now, down to, I think, less than 10% in the private sector. Explain to me how further weakening unions makes any economic sense.
And Paul will, at the beginning of the next segment, I apologize, Bill, we'll be right getting